Hi, I'm Rick Wade, Senior Vice President for Strategic Alliances and Outreach here at the United States Chamber of Commerce. Since our founding, the U.S. Chamber has advocated for policies that help businesses create jobs and grow our economy. And for more than 2 decades, we've been at the forefront of advocacy for investments and the modernization of America's aging infrastructure. We've led a coalition of businesses and policymakers and companies across every industry and sector to move forward on this very urgent and critical national priority. And we're very grateful to Congress for passage of the historic bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, obviously which was signed into law by President Biden. This once-in-a-generation investment in our nation's infrastructure will rebuild America's roads and bridges and rails. It'll make sure that all Americans, no matter where they are or what zip code they're in, that they have access to high-speed internet. And it'll also expand access to clean drinking water. And, when we think about inclusive infrastructure investments, it's important that communities that have been left behind are included. It's important that the nation's 8 million minority-owned firms potentially can have a seat at the table and a role in rebuilding America's infrastructure. And I'm excited to have a conversation today about the investments in water, why water is important, and what this means for America's economy. And I'm excited to have Chuck Chedovitz, Vice President of Environmental Affairs and Sustainability, to join me in this really, really important conversation. Chuck, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much, Rick. It's a pleasure to be here.
You bet. Chuck, let's jump right in. I've had the pleasure of testifying 5 times, and it really has been a pleasure on Capitol Hill. And the last time it was about what I call inclusive infrastructure investment. And we know when we think of infrastructure, we think of roads and bridges, but there's also water. Why is water important as we think about and investing in our infrastructure and what that means for America's economy?
Well, thanks so much, Rick. I think that's a really important question. Water is critical to so many of our lifeline infrastructure that communities depend on across our nation. That's energy, food, and health. There's not much drinkable water on the planet. So only 2.5% of all the water on the planet is fresh water, and the majority of it is trapped in ice at the poles. So while our planet may never run out of water, it's important to remember that clean, fresh water is not always available where and when humans need it. In fact, half the water around the world can only be found in 9 countries. More than 2 billion people live without enough safe, clean drinking water, basic indoor plumbing and sanitation, and there's approximately 2 million Americans without access. There's preliminary findings of a recent study that indicate for every dollar spent on safe sanitation yields 4.6x return in terms of societal healthcare cost reduction. This is just the tip of the iceberg, not to have a play on words, in terms of the importance of water when we think of human health and quality of life.
Yeah, I was thinking as you were talking, of course, one of the areas of communities in our country that obviously made national headlines for years is Flint, Michigan. And when you think about the fact that Black, Latino, and Native American people are more likely to live in homes without clean drinking water, and this not only impacts their health, but the cost of living. I mean, the impact is tremendous. And so the idea that we're investing now in water, it really is about addressing some of these gaps as well that exist across America. Is that a fair assessment?
No, you're absolutely right. The challenges that we saw in Flint on water quality are just a small portion of the visible issues that communities across the nation are facing with respect to access and water quality issues. Water is key to so many of the sectors that we depend on for economic growth. And as I like to say, Rick, every job is a water job.
Mm. Now, that's an interesting observation there, because we hear that every job is a tech job or tech enabled. But that's fascinating. Chuck, break that down, that every job is a water job.
Well, when farmers depend on water to grow crops, Water is an important input into manufacturing and energy and urbanization, healthcare, delivering health that during this pandemic, hospitals and doctors could not address the issues they had without access to water in their hospitals.
Wow. So when we think about, scarcity of water and these kinds of issues, these are real risks, if you will, to our economy and to business, and obviously to people, right?
No, that's exactly right. When you think about, where companies look to site their new plants, their new manufacturing facilities, looking for places that have access to water is important. Water scarcity is a big risk for businesses around the world, like data centers, for instance. You just mentioned high tech. Cooling for data centers is extraordinarily important for them, and is a high issue of risk if they don't have access.
I really think that's important, because I think when a lot of people think of infrastructure, we think of transportation and roads and bridges, but this is just as significant. Chuck, give us some sense then of what the investment looks like. I think it's some $55 billion perhaps, but break that down for us, sort of what the investment in water infrastructure looks like in this new historic bill.
Well, you talked about kind of once in a generation. I've been working in the water sector for more than 25 years, and we've been having these discussions for just as long. And we've been talking about investments like this for a long time. This is truly a transformational investment in our water infrastructure. So 55 billion will break down, and that's just the money that goes to EPA. So there's additional money across the federal family in the water space. So in bolstering state revolving funds, which are the traditional way in which states receive capitalization funds from Congress to issue low interest loans to communities to address their water infrastructure needs. And that's both on the drinking water and the clean water, wastewater side. So the bill provides $23 billion to both the drinking water and clean water SRFs. That's more than $11 billion each. That's about over 5 years, and that's about twice as much or more than twice as much as they typically receive in annual appropriations, which is just a little bit over $1 billion per year. This is also important provisions in the bill that reduce for the first 2 years on the drinking water side the state match for those capitalization grants. So typically in the law, there's 20% required state match. The IIJA reduces that to 10 for the first 2 years. And then all these funds, 49% of them must be provided as grants or loan forgiveness. And that's important for the communities that you're most interested in, Rick, because those small communities or with disadvantaged populations, they need that flexibility to not necessarily receive these funds as loans, but can be used as grants or forgiveness on other loans that they might have received in the past.
That is a really, really good and distinguishing point. Thank you for making that. Chuck, now, I think we've said, generally speaking, some 90% of the investments in overall in infrastructure sort of flows or goes through the states. Is that the case with water? And then also, is EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, sort of the administrative oversight agency, or are these investments spread across multiple agencies here in the federal government?
Well, there are investments across the federal family, but the 55 billion is just to EPA. And so the way that they disperse the funds under both the Safe Drinking Water Act and Clean Water Act is to the states, to agencies that will administer the state revolving funds. And so these funds would be allocated based on a needs assessment, which is already in place. And I believe they'll be updating that soon. So states receive their allotments, and then they then receive applications from communities to disperse the money.
And we think about some of these communities that have been disadvantaged. The rallies that not-for-profits or nonprofit organizations really do play a critical role in delivering services. So they would be eligible for some of these grants at that local level.
Well, I mean that's a really challenging question. So, on the drinking water side, there is the private sector and not-for-profits can receive the funding. I'm not, on the clean water side. There is some challenges with changing the law to ensure that the private sector can receive it. Some of the drinking water agencies around the country are not for profit, and so they can receive the money and administer it. NGOs in general, you typically can support those agencies, but they typically do not receive the grants directly.
So if I am a nonprofit, or let's say even a minority-owned business at the local level, should I be engaging the governor's office or the local state water and environmental management agency, or what even could there even be a role of connectivity with our state and local chambers? How does that work?
No, that's really an important question. So we've been advising our members to start communicating along with their state and local chambers to reach their SRF managers and policymakers at the state level to communicate their priorities. It's really important that you begin having those conversations now on what projects are important to you, so that those SRF managers can be in a position, along with the state policymakers, to know that these projects are important. So when your utility or your community makes those proposals, they know that the business community is behind them.
Yeah. Chuck, I joined you in some of your meetings over the years around sort of resiliency, which has actually been a great learning opportunity for me. But how, because I know there's some direct investments around building resilient infrastructure. We think about pre-disaster mitigation projects, but why is that important?
Well, 65% of small businesses across the country don't have contingency plans in place. And so that means they're particularly at risk to natural disasters and other severe weather, which, as you know, is becoming more and more commonplace. And so really important that they and other communities start planning ahead of the next crisis. Right now, most of the federal money, about 87% of it, goes to post-disaster spending. Only recently have we really been focusing on getting that investment ahead of the next disaster. So the Chamber, along with a number of other organizations around the country, over the last couple of years have really been supporting pre-disaster mitigation as an important solution. The investment ROI is anywhere from 3 to 11 to 1 if you make the investment before the disaster than after it. And so there's a number of programs that receive direct appropriations in the IIJA, which were already authorized, that the Chamber was supporting, about $1.5 billion that goes to programs under FEMA's jurisdiction, and then a number of pre-disaster mitigation and resilience programs under EPA, U.S. DOI, DOT, the Army Corps of Engineers, also working on areas of mitigation, not necessarily pre-disaster mitigation. So I think that's an issue that we're really working to propose in policy going forward.
Yeah. You know, I got to admit, I probably learned more about water from you than I have in an entire lifetime. It's been fascinating. But one of the areas that was really interesting to me as I've combed through the Infrastructure Act is in this whole area of wastewater, the appropriations. And I think I saw something there where, is everything from low income assistance, pilot programs, lead testing in schools, workforce development, but cybersecurity. How in the world does all of that fit together?
Well, I think resilience, can take in many forms when you're planning ahead of the next crisis. And cyber issues are certainly something that are of concern to water utilities, both on the drinking water and wastewater side. You may have heard of recent events where around the world and in the United States, there's been threat of cyber incidents where utilities have been threatened with either dam releases or other shutoffs due to technical and technology issues. So a really important issue. The recent OEA bill, which passed several years ago in 2019, did contain some requirements for utilities to plan ahead and to have cybersecurity planning ahead of the next crisis.
And then the final question, I guess, directly related to infrastructure. I was reading about the investment around Western water, and that was very intriguing to me. You start thinking about investments for wildfire and investments for ecosystem restoration. Help us understand that connectivity and why that's important.
Well, the droughts usually have a certain defined period of time that you're dealing with, but it's safe to say that in the Western United States they're dealing with, and I don't know if it's a term of art or not, but a mega drought. This is a drought that has been going on for on and off for about 20 years, and so incredibly challenging situations for communities and for companies to get access to water. I think planning ahead is an important piece, and figuring out how to create more storage. So when the rain events do occur, we're able to have storage for the times when there is a drought, and then also to look at water recycling issues. So under the direction of the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, which, as you may know, manages water in the 17 Western states, looking at ways in which their facilities can focus more on water recycling. And they'll have some new grant programs standing up to communities to get them engaged in water recycling. And it's interesting that you raised that, because at the Chamber, we're partnering with the Water Reuse Association and our members to stand up what we're calling the Industrial Water Reuse Champions Award, to recognize what companies are doing in this space to contribute to water reuse issues.
Thank you. I've been watching some of the agencies. I know Department of Transportation, we're seeing continuous guidance coming from the agency on the implementation and execution. Are we seeing the same, or where should we direct folks to, if you will, if they really want to follow the guidance? Is it to EPA and the other administrative agencies that are overseeing water infrastructure investments? Is that something that we're seeing continuous guidance, or is all the guidance already there?
No, it's a great question. It's still a work in progress. EPA did issue a memo on March the 8th to provide a guide to collaborative implementation for state, local, and tribal partners. But it remains to be seen whether more discussions might be necessary in order to get the clarification and consistency that both communities and others, like the private sector, might need in order to implement these issues.
Well, Chuck, listen, I think that, again, this is significant once in a generation investment that we're making to rebuild and modernize our infrastructure. Is truly transformative for communities and has the ability to change and impact lives. Water is a key part of that. And I'd like to give you an opportunity. Any parting thoughts? It's been very important to have this conversation with you so that communities that we're engaging at the Chamber and the 8 million or more minority-owned businesses, that they understand. And this information is extremely, extremely valuable. So I want to thank you for joining me, but certainly give you a chance to make any other parting comments or any additional thoughts.
Well, I appreciate that, Rick. And so I'll mention two things. One, I'd like to just underscore two other parts of the bill that in particular, communities that are disadvantaged might be interested in. So one is accelerating lead line replacement, a big challenge across the U.S. That was certainly brought to light by the point you made about Flint. $15 billion that will be set aside in the drinking water SRF dedicated to lead line replacement. Then there's also $10 billion that allocated for emerging contaminants, $4 billion under drinking water SRFs, $1 billion to the clean water SRFs, and then $5 billion directly to small disadvantaged communities. The important part of that funding is 100% of it will be administered to communities as grants. And so that's, I think, particularly opportune for those communities that might be in particular need to address these issues. The second thing that I'll mention is, I think to underscore the importance role that minority-owned businesses can play in addressing these issues. So one, small communities and communities of color where many of these businesses reside particularly need technical assistance to access and administer the access to these funds. And so companies that are in a position to provide that technical assistance, including the minority-owned businesses that you mentioned, many of them that have that expertise, that might be a good role for them to play. The other piece, something that we always talk about at the Chamber, is the way in which our member companies are involved in the notion of innovation. Innovative solutions are going to be critical in order to pushing forward and accelerating access to clean water and to get water infrastructure in place across our nation. And it's the business community that has those technologies and can develop those and implement them that will be so important. So I would be pleased to talk with you further about this going forward and look forward to the further conversation.
Well, again, Chuck Chedovitz, our Vice President for Environmental Affairs and Sustainability, thank you so much, my friend, for joining me again in this very, very important conversation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rick. Appreciate it.